Great Wednesday. Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm joined by my co-host, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
Doing well, King, as I always say, but I mean it each time I say it. It's always great to see you at a little bit after 10 on a Wednesday morning so we can be in conversation together.
Absolutely. Off to a late start. Had a little technical difficulties this morning, but thank you all for bearing with us. Well, as we like to normally get started, I'll start saying gratitude this morning. Grateful for my life, my health, my ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have a sound mind. I'm grateful for another 24 hours to pursue my purpose in life. A mother who's alive and has love energy in her and still has sound mind. And again, getting through the issues I had to, technical challenges, as well as, being able to converse with you this morning. So that's my gratitude today, Reggie. How about yours?
Yeah, so as always, grateful for indoor plumbing, a refrigerator with food in it, and the electricity that allows that food to stay chilled. And some of the other basic, you know, essentials, but really luxuries that I enjoy and we enjoy in terms of being able to cook and have a roof over my head and uh, just I'm aware that not everybody on the planet has that, and more personally, just so far as I can tell, I'm sure you'll let me know if this changes, but I have a reasonably sound mind and a sound body as well, and I'm just grateful for these. I say little things, but they're really pretty important things because there are a lot of um, luxuries, which a lot of people probably wouldn't consider luxuries, that I would gladly let go of before I would ever let go of indoor plumbing, refrigerator that works, and accessible fresh food. So I'm grateful for basic needs being taken care of.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what's your spiritual energy level number today?
Yeah, I'm at a 10. Like, as I joke, but I really mean this. It's a choice, and I get up every morning now, and I have aches and pains, and I stretch and I get my body fixed and make it feel a little bit better. But in terms of my spiritual energy, I can just choose to change my state or my mood and engage more fully or as fully as I want. So I'm engaging here with you at a 10 this morning.
Absolutely. And I concur with you. I'm a 10 as well. As we both like to say, there's a choice. And I see no rational choice of choosing anything less than being 10. And even, when I notice that if I'm not feeling the energy of a 10, I begin to think in my mind what can get me there.
Hmm.
And I begin to look at doing that at some point to make sure that I get to that 10.
Yeah.
Because again, life is just not as enjoyable. So I think about the fact that throughout the day, if I don't get to that 10, then I'm gonna have a less enjoyable day.
Yeah.
Just off that, point alone, regardless what else comes into my life throughout that day. But anyway, um, gratitude and 10 with you as well. So why don't you walk us into what we're gonna discuss in today's show?
Yeah. So we're going to continue, what we discussed last week, and I'll provide the context for that. There's the foundation of our ongoing conversations, healing America's narratives, the feminine, the masculine, and our collective national shadow. The book that came out in the late summer, early autumn of 2022. Um, and I just want to, refresh our memories. Not that you and I need it, but any listeners might. And we're really looking at the collective national shadow of the United States in order to heal the narratives, to come to terms with the diverse and differentiated and opposing narratives in this country, especially, but not only now in 2024. It's essential that we don't just look at history or just at psychology or just politics, there's a lot of lenses we can look at, and the book and our conversations take an integrated look. We try to include as many of those lenses as possible. So more specifically, there are 9 shadow traits or 9 shadow elements that we've been speaking about, where shadow, again, is the aspect of an individual, an organization, or in this case, in our conversations, a nation that the individual, organization, or nation denies or doesn't know about itself. And if somebody said, well, this is really true about you, they would deny it, just say, no, not at all. And really mean that. They don't see it at all. So the 9 traits that have been evident since the conception of the country and the birth of the country, now going on 248 years, are ignorance, arrogance, fear, bigotry, violence, greed, excess, bullying, and untrustworthiness. Those are the 9 traits that are more or less easy to point to historically and currently. More specifically today, what we spoke about last week, and we'll probably still continue talking about in different specific iterations, we're approaching another presidential election in November of 2024. And there's a strong movement which began it really began, I would argue, in the 80s. But with the election of Donald Trump in 2016, he was an individual who didn't really particularly know anything about the United States Constitution, nor did he seem to care too much about governing. He just wanted to be president. In fact, that's not even true. He just wanted to be in the limelight. That's what he's been doing his whole life. But because he was funded by fundamentalist Christians in this nation, not just them, but especially them, and because he's been able to convince a lot of people that the 2020 election, which he lost by almost 8 million votes, was stolen from him. And he's already begun to say out loud that if he loses in 2024, it will be because it's rigged against him. And that there are tens of millions of Americans who are still willing to believe that. What we find ourselves facing is the real threat of an end to democracy, as those of us who have been alive for the last 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years have experienced post-World War II, and a move toward an autocratic, theocratic type of governing, which should be terrifying for anybody who kind of likes even the idea of a democratic republic. I'll say 1 or 2 more things, and we can kind of jump in here. So a couple of voices that have been really powerful in the last, what would it be now, 6 years or so, are Stephen Levitsky, and I always forget his partner's name, Daniel Ziblatt, who in 2018 published a book called How Democracies Die, and just this year published a book entitled The Tyranny of the Minority, which is specifically about how American democracy is in danger. And they just show the symptoms of how in both South America and Europe, how democratic republics, former democracies, were taken over by authoritarian leaders, rarely with a military coup and violence. It was typically through manipulating the electoral process, through lying about the opposition, through gerrymandering and changing voting districts, and other anti-democratic moves, which have been going on in this country really since its inception. If you go back to Reconstruction and Jim Crow, but since the 80s, in terms of the real move to limit the power of poor people, and especially Black poor people in this country. And we could speak for the next 10 years about these issues, but that's where we are now. And it's really important because a lot of people, don't take it that seriously. They just figure everything will be okay. Some are so overwhelmed by the prospect that they just kind of zone out and may not even vote, which is the biggest mistake. and then others are really concerned and don't know what to do. And so it's an important conversation because of the amount of intentional disinformation out there. Disinformation is an intentional putting into the information ecology untruth information. Misinformation is a misunderstanding. Disinformation is an intentional corruption of the information ecology, and that goes on a regular basis. So that's where we are today. That's the fun and wonderful context within which we'll be talking today. So I turn it over to you now to see what direction we'll go.
Well, thank you again for choosing such a wonderful topic and in keeping what is important, as Stephen R. Covey likes to say, making the main thing the main thing.
Hmm.
And I look at what you laid out to be obviously definitely very important, very critical, to the timing of where we are right now, particularly as the way I see things, we continue to be forced into these forced tribes. And then these forced tribes create a commonality based on identity. And these identities now are saying that, as you talk about in your book, as well as the group-centric thing of identity of we are better than you and you must lose.
Mm-hmm.
And when you throw race in that, and then you throw in the fact that when people feel as though things will be lost, now you got folks who are feeling victim. So all that thrown in a pot is what I'm saying, and democracy getting to be lost as a result of how people now are disenfranchised so much because the systems have wore them down that you have to be somewhat, to be honest, privileged to be able to be this aware. And it's sad to say that you got to be privileged to be conscious, to protect the democracy. But some people, are dealing with the day to day that makes them not focused. Like, for example, it's a song by Bob Marley called "The Midnight Ravens," and the first lines of the song go, "Can't tell the woman from the man." No, I said you can't because they're dressed in the same pollution. They're dressed in the same pollution, and their minds is confused with confusion. So this problem seems to never be no solution. And I said it to say is that's how I believe some folks look at Republican and Democratic parties. They dress in the same corruption and they can't see a difference.
Hmm.
Now, I think that people who are economically challenged right now and have been, like they've never had a position of thriving. They've always been in a position of surviving. Don't look at democracy as anything worth saving because they haven't been the recipients of the value of it. So that's where I feel that some people are, and they don't, because you can't see down the road. In other words, you have to see from the day perspective in your survival mode. And when you're in survival mode, you're thinking for the day. You're not looking, well, where am I going to be in 5 years? Where am I going to be in 10 years based on these political changes or the climate that we're in right now? My question for you now, with me saying all that, is from your research, you lay out in your book the narratives that we should be healing in America, and they have the historical context for the racism and discrimination and marginalization of women, Native Americans, blacks, as well as key things that the country has shown these shadow elements. Mm-hmm. So now my question for you within that context is, what do you feel is the reason why certain things are being done right now, as opposed to maybe 5 years from now or 10 years ago.
Okay, can
Why?
you just clarify when you say certain things are being done right now? What do you mean by certain things?
Well, I'm sorry. Yeah. What I mean by is what you laid out as democracy coming to an end. So the strategy that's been implemented to kind of bring forth that objective. Why do you feel that now is the time that it's happening?
Yeah, no, so that's a great question. It's a huge question, and I'm gonna give an answer to that with the caveat that the answer is multi-dimensional. So it's not one reason and you know that it's not one thing that's going on that makes it happen now, but the collective, and it's really a global thing going on, not just in the US, but we're talking about the United States. But we have to remember that we don't live in a vacuum, that we're part of this global community. You touched on a couple of the reasons. Call it the neoliberal capitalist marketplace society that America is, was really good for a handful of people. There were billionaires and multimillionaires, some of whom worked very hard to earn a lot of money, some of whom inherited, some of whom were in the right place at the right time. It's a really small percentage of the population. There used to be, and there still is to a certain extent, a middle class, not like it was perceived in the 50s and 60s, that got some of the benefit of that. They're able to buy houses, the old phrase of, 2 cars in every garage and a chicken in every pot. So you had food, you had shelter, you had relatively safety. That was primarily a white suburban success story. There were places that were, black suburbs where the success was evident as well, but there were fewer and further between. But while all of that was going on, and this is what you pointed to, there were people of all skin pigmentations who were not the recipients of the good news. They were struggling to make ends meet. They were, kind of left out of the system. And as more and more, and this is just the economic piece, there's more to it. As more and more wealth was accumulated from the latter quarter or third of the 20th century through the 21st century by a handful of people, and as more jobs went overseas or became automated, more and more people who had manual labor skills were out of work. And they felt that the government wasn't taking care of them. And they were right to a certain extent. The government failed poorer Americans over and over and over again. Fast forward to 2015, when a man showed up and basically said, here's all the things that are wrong. I'm not part of the government. I'm an outsider, and I alone can fix this. I know you're struggling. And he was speaking specifically to 2 groups of people. Poor whites, poor lower middle income whites, who saw their jobs disappear, who were just really struggling to make ends meet, despite having, working hard to take care of themselves and their kids. And then really wealthy people who wanted to pay fewer, less taxes on their great wealth. And the government provided them with that over some decades. And even though he knew nothing about governing, and even though he knew nothing about the US Constitution and really didn't want to be president, he really didn't want to. He got elected. The country suffered under his presidency because he kept virtually none of the promises he made to anyone, except for lowering taxes, primarily for the rich, but some of that did trickle down to middle-class Americans. He didn't replace the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, which he promised to do because he hated Barack Obama for some reason. He never even put forth a prospect for doing that. He didn't seal off the southern border with a wall. And he completely mismanaged the COVID pandemic. He made believe it wasn't even happening for about 2 months. All of that was happening. That's presidential and economic, in a real surface overview. While the catastrophic effects of planetary ambivalence, also known as some of the symptoms of species extinction, climate change, and global warming, began to show up more and more. Massive hurricanes, unlike anything that I saw in my lifetime, major fires across North America, but also, a third of Australia burned, mainly an unpopulated area. So the planet was beginning to rebel. We now know that there are things called PFAS, and I forget what that's. It has something to do with phosphorus, but are these chemicals that are in every molecule of water on the planet, from Antarctica. If there's any water in the Sahara Desert, it's there too, and they're forever chemicals. Even if we stop producing them today, they may never go away, and they're really bad for living creatures. So there's this huge kind of coming to terms with past sins, because we've known about the planetary challenges at the very least since the middle of the 20th century, 1950s and 60s. And despite clamoring about it, really have done nothing. A lot of bad things are coming to a point now, coming to a head now, and they're interrelated. Because climate change and starvation and availability of clean water leads to refugee crisis, and nobody wants any more refugees because of various wars and the floods in Syria and the earthquake in Turkey and lots of other reasons there are refugees. And all of that reinvigorates what you pointed to, tribalism, this us versus them mentality. So a lot of things are coming to a head right now. And when that happens, people get scared. And in the United States, the most powerful coalition of people who are scared are white, right-wing Republicans. And they're very organized in their efforts to try to take over the federal government. They've done a good job already. And they don't have the best interests of all Americans in mind. They have the best interests of their particular collective in mind. I'm going to say one more thing. I know I'm saying a lot. The immediate approach that's needed in this country to counter that, which won't resolve all the issues I just identified, because some of them are really hard to resolve. But what's really needed is for those who aren't part of that right-wing coalition. There are two broad ways of looking at this. One is we want to exclude some American citizens from the promise of America. Then there are lots of people, in fact, the majority of Americans, some of whom are Republicans, who believe that every American citizen should be included in the promise of America. And if all of the people who believe in inclusion, even if they can't agree on how to manifest it from a legislative perspective, if all of them participate in the democracy by being in touch with their elected officials and by voting, the fringe on the right cannot win in a fair and free election. So that's a starting point. But to your question, a lot of global and domestic problems that are interrelated, what Daniel Schmachtenberger calls the meta crisis, are coming to a head at the same time. And the best and the brightest thinkers we have, those that are removed from politics, who are really trying to understand these issues and find ways to resolve them, are very honest in saying that the solutions are not at hand yet. So a lot of people are scared, but this didn't just suddenly happen. There were warning signs for decades. So that's my best relatively short answer. to why it's all happening now. I hope I at least approached an answer to the question you asked.
No, you have. So thank you. But just again, looking at it from a strategy standpoint, what you laid out, the white conservatives that want to, of course, continue to be in power and make sure that the laws and the systems are beneficial to them and only them. What's interesting is that from a strategic strategy perspective, they going in on Trump, and Trump has these frailties. That's the thing. That's, to me, is where I see that where their plan is going astray. That was the risk, because Trump has the appeal, the charisma to get the white to a blue collar to resonate with what he's saying. And that's really the core of the base there, is that he has them mobilized for action.
Even though he's never done anything to actually help them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But and that's the putting all the cards in on him. Now he's made the party basically his party, where now they have to even choose against their own best interests based on his whims of what he feels he likes. And that's where it really becomes dangerous and even disadvantageous against, not for them to have that man in that kind of powerful position.
See, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So I'm saying, just even that is, if you are a conservative and you're saying, well, everything else he's doing, I can be okay with because I'm getting some of my objectives met. But the thing, like I said, that you're also sacrificing, to your point about democracy as well, is the fact that he's not going to just continue to be conservative in his viewpoints. He's in his policies. He's going to be Trump in his policies.
Mm-hmm.
And they're only going to benefit him when it comes down to it, not necessarily conservative agenda. Once he puts himself in another position again to say, I'm in power now. Because I've seen the interviews on several different interviews with several different those folks who go out to the rallies, the true Trump base, as they say, the MAGA crowd. And they're like, we don't care that he's burned out democracy. We don't care if he wants to be a dictator. America needs a dictator. They just like totally caught up in the character of who Trump has presented himself to be, that for them, that's why they're voting for him. Not necessarily any particular policy he's initiating. They just really want to have him in power, and by any means necessary. And that's really was dangerous. So that to me is where I'm seeing the cracks, so to speak, in their system. Is that's what's going to be what helps backfire, because they live and die with his moral character.
Yeah, and it's a very current specific example of that is, this week, and I try not to. I believe that a lot of politicians, not all of them, and a lot of what I like to call performance news celebrities, as opposed to real journalists, they basically play whack-a-mole and every day, and they do need to cover the news and what a presidential candidate says should be part of the news. So I understand that. I get that. But a current issue in one of the lawsuits against him, both criminal and civil lawsuits that he's facing, he's already been found guilty in a civil lawsuit where he was, he had to pay for defamation of a woman that he sexually abused. And he owes, I forget what the number is with that, it's 80 something $million, I think. Don't quote me on that number. But more importantly, he had to post a bond in New York for over $400 million, and plus interest, it went over $500 million, which is $500 million. And he basically said, his lawyer said, I can't post it. They went to 30 different possible funders who would post the bond, and nobody was willing to do it. And now they're saying he will come up with the money. He has less than a week to do that. And there are many people and or nations or organizations on the planet. I say many, probably under 100, but there are enough of them who could easily post that bond for him. And if they did, he would then be indebted to them. Now, it could be a Russian oligarch. It could be someone like Elon Musk. I'm just naming people who have enough money to do that. I don't know that any of them would even do it, so I'm not saying that's going to happen. But we have a desperate man whose public facade is gradually coming down because with all of his, even his lawyer, the young woman whose name I forget now, who was, she was, on the record saying he has billions and billions of dollars, posting the bond won't be a problem. She was saying that, but he doesn't have it. He doesn't have liquid assets of about $500 million that he can post the bond. So his public facade of being a successful, wealthy businessman is fading. And there's an old cliche that desperate times call for desperate measures, and desperate people do dangerous things. So he's becoming increasingly more desperate and dangerous. And I always come back to this after I talk about Donald Trump, because he didn't create this mess. He's been a catalyst for it. But the mess, the wealth inequality, the disintegration of the democracy made him possible. He got to be who he is and where he is because of what's possible in this country. And the real threat are the tens of millions of people who are willing to get behind him, including those in his campaign, those local legislators and state legislators who are supported by him and who trumpet, no pun intended, his message. And that's the real danger, because they'll still be there without him. Now, maybe they won't be as bold without him, because most of them wouldn't be where they are without him. But the real problem is there are tens of millions of Americans who have the right to vote, who think an autocratic leader is a good idea. And it's a guy who knows nothing about governance and never cared about public service or governance for his entire adult life prior to 2015. So that's the scary thing. And that's the thing that, Justice Souter in 2012, in that conversation at the University of New Hampshire Law School, basically said out loud. He said, what scares me around democracy is not that another country is going to come in and take us over in a war, or he gave other things he wasn't scared of. So what scares me the most is civic ignorance. And that if things get bad enough in this country and enough people don't know how the government works or how to engage with the government, that one person is going to come along like Caesar did in Rome and say, here's the problems. I know how to fix it, and I alone can fix it. And the voting public and the government will say, okay, here's the ball. Go ahead and run with it. And that's exactly what happened with Donald Trump. And that was, again, Souter wasn't talking about Donald Trump. He was talking conceptually about what worried him most about American society. And he specifically referred to it as civic ignorance. And that was in 2012. That's exactly what happened with the Trump presidency. And it could get worse with another Trump presidency. So I'm not an alarmist, and I tend to be optimistic. And this should scare people, I think.
Well, you said quite a bit there. I think that.
Sorry.
No problem. What you initially started out with was the fact that he's in financial trouble. And I tend to kind of think that he is in financial trouble, but I don't think that the stakes are as dire as the media makes it out to be. And here's what I mean by that. Donald Trump has a tremendous amount of social capital. And the fact that he is a former president and can very likely be president again, president with a kind of, he's already defining that he wants immunity. So if he gets elected and gets immunity, letting folks know that's that's how he's going to be living, you know. And so, with that being said, he has the social capital, I believe, to get that $500,000. I'm sorry, $500,000,000, um, a lot easier than what it's made out to be. Because I know that if I was in a position, if you're already a billionaire like Elon Musk or a Russian oligarch, you already think in the context of everything just about money and power.
Mhm.
And there is no better way to have money and I mean to have the ultimate power than to have the president of the United States indebted to you.
Yeah.
And so that I can't see a better investment to make other than to pay that off. Other than the only challenge is how do we do it? How do we hide it so it doesn't become obvious that the media can just throw out a Russian oligarch's name and say he gave him $500 million. It has to be tied to his properties as a lien, or they can then front it through some banks. And then we'll never know who's the original person. They'll just say these particular banks or investment houses were the ones that were he was able to secure based on his properties. So I just think that he has that social capital to do it.
Mhm.
I mean, because again, he's gonna pretty much have unlimited power or absolute power for sure. And as they say, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So he's
Mhm.
definitely going to be even more corrupt, which I think that's where people are not focused when they see and think that Biden is a worse option. But I just think that folks who are outside of the benefit of the system, they just can't see where it's urgent enough for them to go to the polls. And that's the part that scares me, is where I'm going with this. That's the part I see that it concerns me is that A, either folks not voting, or B, folks saying, well, I just want to change. And if change, whether it's a good change or a bad change, it's a change. I mean, if you look at what's going on with Gaza and the Gaza Strip right now, I don't think they care. Those folks who are impacted and affected by that directly, family, folks who live over there now, folks here who have family over there, whether who is presidents in office is not going to pretty much impact their condition, and that's how they're looking at it. So that's the part I'm saying that I think at the end of the day, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays itself out. Are they going to be able to motivate people through fear on either side to go to the polls and say, "Here's what you're losing. Here's what it looks like if the other side wins," and hopefully this picture repainting is going to be enough to get you to the polls. And if we can get you as a volunteer, then yeah, you tapped into that. But lastly, let me just say this too: that excuse me, I really believe that people are looking for a minority of people are looking for a change and willing to deal with 4 more years of Biden in order to make sure democracy does stay. Because again, just the fact that Trump's, to be honest, democracy is it's hanging by a thread just by the fact that Trump is not in jail. I mean, like Baltimore's former prosecutor, Marilyn Mosby, is going to jail basically for putting down her application in her name at buying a little property as a primary residence, where I know so many people who did that who were in real estate. That's basically because down payments are so high for investor properties, and your second property, you say to be an investor, if you can get it for a lower down payment, you're gonna say, okay, I'm owner occupant in that property. I know so many people have done that. So for her to get convicted and locked up and thrown through the media cycle now, can face up to 25 years in jail for committing that crime. And now Trump has committed not only blatantly all these crimes that we see, and he's still free and is running for president. And most people's eyes, democracies are already gone. Like
Yeah.
it's a joke at the word of it. And I know you're saying it can get worse, but I'm just saying just using it as a as a measuring stick, democracy like it's already gone.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that 100%. It's there are two. I mean, I really do agree with that. And there are two ways of holding it. One is because this has never been done before. I mean, again, the American experiment, and it's never been done. There were ancient Greece had an attempt at democracy, and Socrates kind of chopped it down in his debates and said, "Look, it doesn't really work well." And even I don't know if it was Jefferson or Franklin who basically said, if you want a democracy to work, you have to. The primary goal of the government is to provide for the education or the enlightenment, I forget how they put it, of the people. Because if you have a bunch of people that don't know what they're doing, democracy is bound to run into some problems. But some people, the most optimistic, say, well, what we're facing right now, and I agree that it's not democratic for everyone. Everyone's not treated equally. I absolutely agree. But this is the mess of the experiment. And this is if we come out on the other side of it and things begin to get better, we can look back and maybe learn some lessons. It could fail. America as it was conceived and as you and I were led to believe it was, at least conceptually when we were kids, that could end. There's no guarantee that it keeps going. It's an experiment in governance, and no one else has ever done it. There are other democracies, but it's not like oh yeah, everybody can come, and as long as you do a few of these things, you can be a citizen. And it's an amazing thing. It really is. It's remarkable, but it's in trouble now, and it's been in trouble for many people for centuries, because it didn't serve everyone equally. We've been speaking about, we spoke over a year and a half ago about, the subjugations of women, of indigenous peoples, of Africans and African Americans. So that's all there. I mean, it wasn't this great thing for everyone, but it has, at its best, worked hard to improve those, and it definitely has. It definitely has. It has not yet provided that promise of equality and equal protection of the laws for all citizens. It really hasn't. And anyone who says that it has or that it does is looking through a really narrow lens, I would say. But yeah, it's, as I said, we weren't going to resolve these issues in today's conversation. I was hoping you would, King. But,
yeah. Well, unfortunately, yeah, the issues are much too large for us to resolve it. My final thoughts on it as we begin to come to the top of the hour is the fact that, and if we don't begin to see, if you don't first see yourself, this is what I realize, and this is the question I'm gonna throw at you as well, but from your experience, but this is what I'm saying, and this is what I am believing. Until I learn differently. If you don't see yourself as a human being, you're not gonna see others as human beings. They're gonna just be objects in your preventing you from achieving wherever goal you're trying to achieve, like a car in your way when you try and get into the lane over and go faster. That car is just in your way. So whatever you got to do to get this other driver out of your way as quickly as you can now becomes your most immediate thought, right? So I think it just starts with we gotta see ourselves as human beings, and let that be identity, and then say I want to become better at being a human being, and because human being now implies the natural order of things, nature, growth, all that's kind of implied in the fact that you're being a human being. But until people do, and whatever it takes to get people to do, is going to be interesting. So, whatever triggers action either way is going to be interesting in the next couple of years. But either way, I'm going to focus on growth, my personal growth, and becoming more fully human, and then connecting with others who are in aligning with that type of thinking. So now that was supposed to be a quick assessment, but what do you see as now or steps folks can take away? What can folks take away from moving in a positive direction from today's conversation?
Yeah, so I'm going to just piggyback on what you just said, because that spoke directly to something that you and I have spoken about. It's one of the 7 questions and statements in the final 2 chapters of Healing America's Narratives. I use the word who, but you can use the word what as well. But the question is, who am I really? So you talk about identifying as a human being, and that's a really, it might sound like, well, I know who I am, but there are 3 general ways people answer that. There are more than 3 ways, but there are 3 kind of big categories. One is the kind of the physical psychosocial realm, where I'm, a 5. This is not me. A 6'2". This is what I wanted to be. A 6'2", 285-pound, professional basketball player. That's probably pretty small, but I will say that anyway. Who blah 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 blah. Or I'm a 5'8" attorney, or I'm a whatever. So I kind of describe what I do in the world and what I look like. Right? And that's the kind of the gross body answer. And there's nothing wrong with that, because in a relative sense, it's absolutely true. That's what I do, what I look like. That's true. And I'm this many years old. But there's another way to answer that, where we talk about from a soul perspective. Like, what is my real role on this planet? If I recognize that I'm just another creature on the planet, part of the grass and the buffalo and the snakes and the trees and all of that, and we are that, whether we like it or not, we are a living being on the planet with a lot of other living beings. And what's my real role here, kind of in a metaphorical or archetypal level? I mean, my favorite example is from the guy that taught me this, Bill Plotkin, where his, what he calls a mythopoetic identity, is a cocoon weaver. And everything he's done in his professional life manifests as that, where he basically helps people build cocoons for their own growth, not in the literal sense of the thing that a caterpillar builds, but metaphorically, that's what he does. We all have access to that, but nobody told us that when we were kids, because our education system and our parents, who meant well, were designed to get us into the workforce so we could, continue to grow the GDP. I mean, I'm being a little bit cynical, but that's not untrue. And then there's one more, spiritual. It can answer, who am I really, from a spiritual perspective? So I'm part of that spark that began 14 billion years ago, or 13.8, whatever it is. I come from that. So when people say I'm a child of the stars, it's really true, because that's where it comes from. Whether you're a giraffe, a blade of grass, a squirrel, or a human being, as far as we know, it all began then with hydrogen and oxygen and all the other elements. So from a spiritual perspective, I'm a unique manifestation of spirit, or that vast explosion into being that took place that nobody really can fully understand yet. So that's a long, those second ones, soul and spirit, there's a long way from saying, well, I'm 5'6", 135 pounds, I'm 69 years old, and I'm talking to King right now. That would be my gross body description. So I would say those are at least the 3 possibilities to explore. Get in touch with how you identify yourself. And if you're limiting yourself to what you do to make money, and you need to make money in this society, so we're not criticizing that. I need to make money. I need to make more than I'm making. All right. But if you limit yourself to just that, you are definitely limiting yourself. So expand out, become, as we like to say, more fully human. And you pointed to that directly. So that's the inquiry. Answer the question, who am I really? And don't be satisfied with the surface response that comes up. Dig more deeply. And there are ways to do that in the final 2 chapters of Healing America's Narratives, if you like to read.
All right, absolutely. Thank you. And as our closing segment, we like to talk about who we feel is or has exhibited these fully human characteristics, behaviors that we want to highlight and hold up as an example for folks to either model themselves after or be inspired by or just research and get a better example of someone who has been or is leading a fully human life. So I'll go first. And the person I have in mind that I really began doing a lot of research on lately is Peter Tosh, former reggae artist. He was a member, the original member of Bob Marley and the Wailers, or the Wailers. Came out the first 2 albums, Catch a Fire and Burning. And the reason I choose him is, again, seeing the movie Bob Marley really put me back into a Bob Marley frequency. And that's what it helped me really come to terms with a lot of things, actually. That is that when you are, Bob Marley is an artist you feel. So if all you do is say, well, I've heard his songs before, or I know who he is, you haven't really felt him yet. You haven't got on the right frequency, because when you do, then the different energy you have when you listen to his music, his words, his message, and you realize there's a message to a lot of things he sang. And I say all that to say is that Peter Tosh was in his original band, was in his original path, and they went in different directions when they decided to kind of break up for the reason of them, Chris Blackwell wanting to put Bob Marley out there first as the lead singer and not necessarily agreeing with that. So that's one of the reasons they broke up. But in his solo career, he produced a lot of songs and had a whole different message, different about Marley. Some people compare him to the Malcolm X, to Bob Marley's Martin Luther King's philosophy. But my point is, him being a roster as well, he still was able to be so successful that he got, Mick Jagger in his prime. They decided to produce him and take him, introduce him to the world and his audience. So he had that command of talent to get that kind of attention, but he stayed true to who he was. And that's what I admire. And he still had growth as a human being, as an individual, even though he died violently, went through a lot because of the political climate. He was speaking in Jamaica, but he stayed true to who he was. And that, to me, is someone, even though you can necessarily not agree with everything they've done or said, but you can see the humanity in their actions and their behaviors and their choices, and they stay principle centered at the end. So Peter Tosh.
Yeah, thanks for that. I know less about Tosh than I do about Bob Marley, so now you've piqued my interest. Something else for me to learn more about. I need another lifetime. Actually, I'm going to go. What you just said there just helped me clarify who I wanted to bring up. And a combination of hearing a song this morning when I was having breakfast and what you just did. A guy that I liked, and I liked the group he began with when I was a kid. He's some years older than I am, no longer with us. But who I never really appreciated until after the group broke up. And the group, some people have probably heard of it, was the Beatles. That's like a joke. And it was John Lennon. And they, when they first became popular, and I saw them on the Ed Sullivan show as a kid. They were singing things like "I Want to Hold Your Hand," "She Was Just 17," "All My Lovin'." They were pop love songs for adolescents, basically, and some older people too like them. And once and all of the four guys, the Beatles evolved. They made a lot of money, had great success, and they ended up, because of that, they ended up breaking up because they wanted to do different things. And the song I heard this morning really captures, and Lennon died violently as well, but Imagine was on, came on my feed this morning when I was having breakfast. There's a whole story I could tell about that song, and something that a Catholic priest said from the pulpit when I was in my 30s. And he pretty much dissed John Lennon on the anniversary of his death. And it's not funny. and just said, why people would even like that song. It says, imagine there's no religion. So he had this whole homily about criticizing John Lennon. I wanted to hit him. I'm sitting there in church, and he actually helped me stop going to church over a period of time. He was one of the real factors. And if I had known every line in that song, if it had been a Christopherson song, I was going to walk up and say, just really respectfully, I can explain to you why people like this song, Father. And I was in my mind, but I knew some of the line, but I didn't know the whole song. Because if you unpack the whole song, it's like amazing. Yeah, imagine all of this, how it would be. So Lennon just continued to evolve, and he put his money where his mouth was. And so, that's the guy that I'm pointing to. And, again, as many who evolve like that, their lives are cut short because somebody doesn't like what they have to say. So, and again, I was never like a big crazy Beatle fan or John Lennon fan. I just like them. But, he definitely was an exemplar for that kind of ongoing growth and becoming more fully human. You're muted. Oop, there you go.
Absolutely. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I concur. John Lennon was a great writer and a great person. And see, that's, again, the reason we want to give you examples is because we want you to see that there's a huge upside to becoming more fully human. So when you tap into that, you lose some of the anxiety. Definitely hate goes away because you realize there's no value in hating. What you don't understand, you learn and you grow, and you may dislike people's behaviors, but like I said, never judge a person. So all those things are the benefits, and that's why we wanted to share our example of individuals who we feel are living or has exhibited those fully human characteristics. So thank you again for listening to this week's episode of Being Fully Human. We appreciate those who stuck with us while we ran a little late and ran over to make up for some of the time because we had such a very engaging conversations. Thank you again, Reggie, for choosing the topic and being present and being a fully human yourself with the growth and learning, and the person I can connect and align with. And I believe our listeners as well. So until next Wednesday at 10 a.m., everyone, let's all continue to focus on becoming more fully human. Thank you.